Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. The title of today's webinar is Using Automation to Strengthen Security and Compliance for PeopleSoft FSCM. Our presenter today is Greg Wendt, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any audio issues during this webinar, click on Preferences and then Audio. From there, you can check to see if you are using the appropriate audio device. You can also click on the play sound to check if you can hear the sound coming from your speakers. This presentation will take approximately 45 minutes. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation, so please type any questions into the Q&A chat box for our speakers to answer at the end of the event. To prevent background noise, everyone is on mute. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Greg.
Thanks, Stephanie. Yes, as she said, my name is Greg Wendt. I'm an executive director here at PathLock. I've started with ERP systems as a whole back in the late 90s. And it's really exciting to see what we've actually got to bring to bear now that we're all joined into the PathLock system. So PathLock itself really is a little bit different from those of you that were our PeopleSoft customers, let's say, with our application security platform product. So what we have with PathLock is it gives us 100+ integrations into different applications. And what we can do is really give you an idea as to what the risk is happening across all of those applications. So we can solve SOD, you can see, have that insight, be able to quickly understand what's going on or what's happening inside of the system, and you can quantify the risk and financial impact that's happening based upon the challenges that you're having within your organization. Once again, we can monitor all of the user activities in real time, and it helps improve really your compliance with multiple different regulations or organizations that require you to have certain things in check, whether it's Sarbanes or GDPR, any of those types of things. So those reports become very difficult to maintain, keep up with. What we do is we help make that a lot easier. So through all of those integrations and having access to all of those different systems, it really makes us a market leader in unifying the access orchestration. And by that, I'll show you and talk about access orchestration and what we mean by that inside of all of those different application sets. But just a little bit more information on PathLock ourselves, some of our customers there and our partners. When we look at where we're at around the world, we now have employees all across the globe being able to service multiple different customer organizations and demands by having a very spread out workforce from that perspective. So we've got experts in different parts of the world that are very used to the different challenges that those particular regions have with challenges, whether it's because of audits and those types of things. So as a whole, it's really a great change for us growing from Appsian now into the PathLock system. So let's go ahead and get started. And what I wanted to start with really today is talking about some of the disconnected processes. We're talking to a lot of clients, and I go back to a lot of the different security reviews that I have done. And one of the things that becomes a real challenge is what does a person have access to within the organization, and how are we going to track that, and what are we going to be able to see, and how do we make them make sure that they're compliant on what our policies and procedures really are. So it's difficult to have a lot of cross application controls. When you think about that in and of itself, it's the process of, I have a particular role. Let's say I've got financials, I may be an AP clerk. Well, what does that mean? What else do I have outside of the PeopleSoft system? Do I have access to another ERP system? What are the transactional controls? What are the access designs and the certifications, the role reviews, user access reviews? How often do we have to do that? So it's really about improving the controls and compliance through all of those different processes. When we look at what customers are currently doing today, it's a very disconnected audit process comparative to having some very automated response to deal with, okay, here's how we've done provisioning, deprovisioning, all of those types of things. It also becomes a challenge with cyber attacks or insider theft. When you look at what has occurred out there in the market, you're still talking about the time to realize when a hacker is within your system is still way too long. And that's because it's difficult to understand and have that insight as to what's happening inside of my systems and know what's valid versus invalid type of access. And many of these, let's say we talk about the role review process, for example, a lot of those things are manual still. Many of SOD user role reviews, access reviews, all of those types of things, many of those are very manual still today. It's an email process that goes back and forth, which then causes issues with the audit process in and of itself. And if you're thinking about SOD, how are you doing your sample testing? Which groups are you actually looking at? Are you even targeting the right transactions to do your SOD, which really causes an issue with compliance reporting because it makes it very inconsistent. You may find anomalies this quarter that you didn't find last quarter or the quarter before, based upon all of those different challenges that you have inside of those systems. And those manual processes have always been a challenge. Especially, I was talking to a customer the other day, and we were kind of, just talking about some of the weaknesses or not really weaknesses, maybe some of the challenges with PeopleSoft. And they're like, well, it's interesting that they've never had a user access review or a role review process built within the tool. So it's a challenge. So how do how much effort is needed to enforce the SOD? And by that I mean separation of duty. Just to clarify what SOD is, I'm sure most of you know, but just wanted to articulate that. So and then how much effort is actually needed to maintain clean and coherent roles. That in and of itself, to me, really drives the last bullet point of how are you going to provision users if you don't have an efficient and coherent role strategy. And we'll go into that in more detail, but it really comes down to people, processes, and technology. The latter has to enable the former. The technology and the processes have to come into place, but you've got to have clean business processes set up to then implement them efficiently from a technology perspective. So it really starts with securing your users, the applications, the data, and prove it to the world. So I'm going to build out this slide a little bit. Just so I can kind of talk to it. That's when you're talking about all of the different challenges, you have to have a real-time connection into your system. It's got to start there. And you're talking about cross applications. So it can be ERP, it could be in the cloud, it could be legacy systems, the enterprise systems, they might be on-prem, off-prem. You've got to be able to touch and communicate to all of those different systems to really have the information that's needed. So then what do I do with all of this information once I have it? What does it mean to me? How am I going to add value to this particular information to where it really defines a problem for me or a challenge for me? And when you think about it from let's talk about the user access review. There's always kind of the difference between the can do and the did do. Just because a user can do something doesn't necessarily mean they actually did do it. And there's a big difference between the two of those, and that's one of the things that we're able to step between the two different challenges there. Because can do is simple. You can look at the reviews or the roles and what their access is, and you can always say, oh, this is what the user can do. I have no idea if they actually did it, but this is what the user can do. So you've got to go in and, obviously there's some analysis that needs to be done. You've got to have the user access reviews. How often are you going to do those? Some organizations do them quarterly, some do them every 6 months, or some do them annually. And then what happens with emergency access? How is that turned on, off, those types of things? Because that can do analysis often really points to the holes in the did do. Dealing with the audit reports that I've had to do in the past, it was always a challenge. Being an enterprise architect, for example, in the past, it was one of those scenarios where the auditors would come to me and they would always say, well, you can do this, but I didn't do it. And they're like, but yeah, we don't know that. because we can't validate it. And that's where, if you look up at the top, it's really about proving what's been done. And that did do is where you actually come in and respond to, this is what the user did do. Did they have access to it? Yes, maybe they did, but maybe they didn't actually do anything fraudulent, or they didn't do any processes that I need to be able to really be concerned about in the long run. But if they did do, now that's where the real challenge comes in. So now all of a sudden you're talking about somebody might have performed an SOD violation, um, or went across the different controls or the policies and procedures that you have in place. So that's where the did do really comes in, to be able to answer that question and step it up and say, here's what our users can do, here's what they've done, and here's exactly what's the outputs of that. So monitoring those business transactions and the did do analysis is very, very important, because all of those pieces together are really going to help quantify the risks. And you can't quantify the risks without knowing what a user could do and did do. That's the reason why the two pieces are so important as to what happens inside of the application. And that really is going to help you with financial reporting. It's going to help you with industry requirements, whether it's SOX, any of those types of things. But it's also going to point to that anomalous activity that really is going to cause challenges for your organization. Maybe it's theft, or SOD violations, where somebody created and paying a vendor and those types of things, but they're keeping it under certain numbers, to where it's just $500, $600, $700 or $1,000, and they're just paying this fake vendor and actually making a bunch of money. There's reasons why you hear those stories, because it's difficult to in some scenarios tie these back, because they're the person doing the attack or doing this SOD violation for fraud is doing it because they understand all of the different rules and regulations that are there. So it becomes harder and harder to see and understand, because they know what the limits are and what's going to really be that red flag. So if you don't have the right sample group, you may never find that user. You may never find that particular fraud that's happening inside of your organization. So quantifying that risk is really prioritizing what you as an organization need to look at the most and focus your time on. But really, as it says across the bottom, this is really all the time. You have to be able to look at this all of the time to understand exactly what's happening inside of your systems and what's going on. So when we talk about improving PeopleSoft access governance with automation, there's multiple different ways that you can do that. Obviously, automation is enabling organizations to do more with less. That's a key challenge that many groups that we work with have. I don't know any PeopleSoft team out there that really has more people than they know what to do with, especially when you're talking about putting in the correct controls, putting in the right checks and balances, the workflows, the approvals, all of those types of things. It becomes a challenge because security is still one of those things that is often thought about last rather than first when you're implementing new business processes. So, but automation is also giving you the power of analytics and algorithms to streamline the GRC strategies. So if we look at that, the chart down at the bottom, it really is understanding automated provisioning gives you the ability to have all sorts of different controls that are put into place. One, because if you clean up your roles, for example, through the cleanup analytics, you're going to have clean roles. So now you can do more automated provisioning because you're not handing out roles that have an SOD violation within them, for example. So all of those things help build upon each other to get you to a more automated process control, which will allow you to really be efficient, because then you can work on your risk analysis and spend time focusing on the anomalies rather than focusing on using the shotgun style approach, if that makes sense. So when we simplify the access governance with automation, especially within the PeopleSoft system, there's multiple ways that you have to start. It really boils down to how the access request works, and this is a life cycle. is really how I want you to look at it. So the access request is going to come in. Let's say you've got a new hire. So they're coming in, you hired them to do a particular job. They're going to need resources to be able to do that job. It could be a computer, it could be network. Obviously, they've got to be provisioned inside of the target ERP systems like financials, for example. So, going back to that AP clerk, there's going to be certain things that they need access to be able to do the said job that you hired them for. And maybe that access request kicks off all of the business process and automation to be able to do that. When you're talking about user lifecycle management specifically, that's the mover process or lever, because your employees are going to have a different life cycle inside of your organization. They're not going to probably do the same job forever. They're going to move from maybe a clerk to a manager to a lead, to a director, and all of that life cycle inside of your organization is going to change what they're able to do, what they need access to, what they should do, and all of their different controls, for example, that need to be put into place. And then you've got SOD, separation of duty, conflict resolution. How are you going to work with that? How do you find your samples? How do you see that? How are you going to correct the roles or the permissions that actually give access to the 2 different parts or 3 different parts or more? And some organizations have SOD by design. They just don't necessarily have the workforce. So it's one of those things at that point, if that's built into your policies or procedures, that's fine, but you still need to be able to audit and report on those. So, and then access reviews. It's still a timely review that you have to do throughout your organization. And you need to be able to validate why does this user have access? Do they still need access? Are they still doing that job? There's a lot of times that people end up with additional permissions because they have moved throughout the organization with that user lifecycle and they've switched jobs, but they end up with leftover roles or permissions from the old job that were never really taken away. And then all of a sudden that causes problems inside of the organization. So, and then you have the other example of emergency access. I go back to my administration days. That's really emergency access. I shouldn't have carte blanche, high level access into the production systems. It should be something to where, okay, there's a problem. I have to go fix it. Here you're granted emergency access. You go in, you fix the problem, and then the access goes away. So that way your production system's very hardened, locked down, and you don't have to worry about things. Or maybe it's the fact of, okay, we fixed that in stage. Now we have to migrate that in. So your emergency access is allowing you to migrate that change up into the production system so that you're able to fix the problem. So really access governance is a whole life cycle in and of itself, and it takes all of these different pieces to really make it work effectively. When we talk about improving segregation of duties, it's really how do you identify and resolve cross-application SOD faster? And you can do that through automation. You have to be able to understand, and I'll go into it, especially when we jump into the demo, for example, as to how we can look at multiple different applications, because the roles themselves is something that we've got a kind of a new way to look at roles. Is the way I kind of like to look at it, is the fact that you can make roles more of like a functional process. So going back to the AP clerk, I'm an AP clerk. What does that entail? What do I have access to? Do I need X in Active Directory or Azure? Do I need Y in FSCM, for example? Do I need something else in another product, maybe Salesforce or, some other particular tool and things like that? What all do I need to perform and do my job? So you can group all of those different roles and permissions together so that people understand, oh, this particular person, because they're an AP clerk, has X, Y, and Z access in all of these different target systems. So it allows you to see the risks and understand that in one particular place. And you can also rectify that with intelligent suggestions, because we have the ability to see and understand, oh, this is multiple roles and multiple different systems, and each one of them have their own higher risk portfolios, and with that, it allows you to see, all right, because this user has all of this different access, when there's a change request that comes in for maybe different security, that's where you want to be able to step in and say, oh, that makes sense, yes or no. No, that's going to increase the risk. That's going to put us into in a category to where maybe now we do have an SOD violation and we don't want to do that. So the other part about it is it really reports on the SOD violations without false positives. It cuts down on the false positives. So it allows you, when you're looking at your sample groups, to really focus on the ones that are causing you issues, not just, having pages and pages and pages of a report where you're attempting to figure out which one might really be a problem in the first place. And with access requests, this is really about automating that process to enforce, roll out, have the ability to expedite the request, whether that's an automated request, so it can be completely handled, whether there's a workflow, whether it goes through and has some sort of approval to that as well. Who needs to approve it? Who needs to request it? We can do all of that to make the end user far more productive, and it allows them to empower, routes all of the different information to all the correct people. So it expedites that access request. If you think about it, I talk to organizations and they're like, well, it could take us 3 or 4 weeks when we hire somebody to make sure that they have the correct access, inside of all of the different systems. Well, when you're paying somebody and they don't have the correct access for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks inside of the system to do their job, that's a lot of dead time. It's a lot of downtime that, is costing the organization money in the long run. So if you can expedite that through automated processes, you're going to get a lot of time back. Besides, the nice part about it is when you automate it, it can become consistent and very reliable moving forward. So you can identify those high risk access or the SOD conflicts based upon the challenges of that SOD. And I'll show you this from the demo perspective. So you can quickly find that right role to match to the user through our recommendation engine as well. So it allows you to quickly dial in on exactly what that user should have access to. The automation of the user lifecycle management really is going to increase your productivity as well. And it's going to cut down on the process or the challenge of somebody ending up with additional controls or access that's left over after they move jobs. So we fully support that joiner mover leaver process to where you can tie in what access is going to happen inside of the different application sets and what that user needs. You can also automate that process to where, let's say in the workflow, I'm moving from an AP clerk to now I'm going to be an AP manager. Okay, well, how long do I need the clerk access to go to the manager? Or maybe I'm leaving that department altogether and I'm going to do something else. So are we going to, allow that user to have their multiple roles for a week? Maybe it's 2 weeks, and then at that particular point, the system automatically takes it away. Those types of things. You don't have to remember. There's not a note that says, oh, by the way, Greg, go away and take, go back in and take Sally's, access to AP clerk away because they've changed roles in 2 weeks or they have a new job. It's something that you want to automate and bring in, streamline that particular process. So the nice part is it's all audited through all of those different steps as well. So going back to that access governance lifecycle, it really is about how do you protect and control that process from beginning to end. Whether you're deploying and implementing a new employee and you're provisioning that employee, or you're deprovisioning an employee that's now leaving. What are going to be your policies and procedures that go through there? When you're talking about deprovisioning, are they still going to need access to maybe HR, for example, whether it's SAP or PeopleSoft or, EBS to come in and get W-2s? Do we have to have or allow them to continue to have an account for an extended period of time because of, limited access for tax reporting or to be able to get that information at the end of the year? That's a lot of organizations do that. Well, we can automate that, so it's nice and clean. They lose access to everything else but what's set up and controlled. So managing access requests compliantly, when you talk about access requests and the updates to the accounts, typically a lot of those are still managed via Excel, email, those types of things. And it's not really something that, when you're talking about an audit review, is very efficient and strong. And that's where you're talking about the user access reviews not only being automated, but having the repeatable process on that and being able to understand, from a review, what happened before, what's the documentation, should this person have it? And I'm going to show you all of those things. So it all goes into improving the audit effectiveness and scope, really. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into demo so we can see some of this real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and change my screen up here a little bit. So to show. Forward here. So I'm just going to refresh this since I've been talking, make sure I didn't get signed out. So what we've got here is an actual dashboard inside of the Pathlock system. And one thing that I wanted to do is definitely tell you that this is a cloud-based system, so it's not within your PeopleSoft system. So those of our PeopleSoft customers and things like that, this is an external system, and it takes feeds and information out of your PeopleSoft. Um, to be able to do all of these things. So when we talk about the scenario of, let's kind of start with that life cycle, for example. So I'm going to go back to really starting at the beginning. So as we look at it, one of the things that we can see is a pending access. So when we talk about an access request, that might come from a couple of different areas. That could be automated. It could be a request from an end user. It could be a request from a manager. How is that process going to come in? Well, we have the forms to where you can actually do that. And really what happens is that access change request is going to come in. Could be provisioning of new access. It could be, a new user, all in all. The nice part is from the flow, you can actually take an action on that immediately. You can update it, change it, escalate it, transfer it to somebody else. You can also view the details. What is the change that's happening here that this user is requesting? At this particular point, Robert is requesting access for a role that's unusual for his department. The user risk score is high. Well, what is the user risk score? So what we do is, that's where we were talking about understanding what the risks are for this particular user. So we can score that user, and with the changes that have been requested, we can also tell you an impact risk score as well. So we can see that the risk score is going up. So maybe I do or don't want to make these changes that are being requested because of that increase in the risk score. So the nice part is it's an automated process that can come, if you approve or reject it, it's all going to be automated. It's going to go through the right workflows. So that's one of the areas to start with. When we come back and look at it, though, let's actually talk about the roles in and of themselves. So I want to start at the roles here real quick, and then I'm going to go to the role designer. When we have a role in and of itself, you're going to see the applications. You can see that they have access to maybe multiple applications in and of itself. So if I were to drill in and look at some of these, I can actually see that, oh, this is Oracle Cloud. I've got multiple different pieces. Oh, my browser window just decided to go backwards. So you can understand what this role consists of, and that goes back to the specifications of allowing you to define and really build out roles that consist of more than just the one technical piece of the role. You can still build a technical role of, this role does X in FSCM, for example, but maybe you also want to make it to where it's more of a business role, to where to do this business function, this is what the user needs access to. They need this in Active Directory, this in FSCM, they need this in HR, they need this inside of SAP, for example. So you can tie all of those things together. So once those roles are looked at, you have the ability to really go into the role designer. So when users or managers, whoever's making the role request change, or the design change, there's multiple ways of looking at that. So I'm just going to, grab one of these. Let's do this one rather than that one. I'll do this one. So AP clerk. So right now, what that consists of is a certain application. So they've got, Oracle ERP Cloud, for example. So I'm going to say I want to edit this. At this particular point, one of the things that we can quickly see is what roles do they have, what application do they have access to. So now I want to add some roles. So a request has been made to change the function here. So at that particular point, I can come in and add in additional functionality. So I'm just going to kind of, grab one of these. Let's do this one here, and I'm just going to hit add. Well, this is where we've actually got the simulator. So if you take this person and you add in this additional authorizations, for example, what we're going to see is, oh, this is actually going to create some different conflicts. This is what their existing roles are. This is what we're looking to add. So what is that going to do within the system? So if we do this, it's going to change 47 users, of which, some of them are very high risk users. Also, what is the impact? So the proposed impact increases your program risk significantly. Careful review because of the variance of what this role is going to do now and the people that it affects. We can actually predict or project what that role change is going to do. Once again, you can actually see the risk score. Before, it was obviously a very tight role. The risk score was very, very low, but now by adding in additional functionality, it's going to increase that risk score significantly. Probably a red flag. And that's where, when you're talking about who may be using this, obviously it's going to be a security analyst. It's definitely going to be a auditor, but it's also going to be the people who are going to request some of these changes. They could look at it themselves. So maybe it's the business owner themselves who's actually coming in and looking at this to see what their risks are and what's happening inside of the system. It just doesn't have to be the auditor that looks at that. This allows you to have information at your fingertips to be able to see all of those things. So very quickly, through that role simulation, it helps you manage those requests about what's coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of there. Another area that we hear, different challenges are with is really that role review process, and we can do this with the user access reviews, or we can do it with the role review as well. So what I'm going to do is, what we call this is a campaign. And inside of a campaign, it's completely automated. So that process is going to start, and it's going to happen at the beginning of a quarter, for example. So we can have quarterly user access reviews that are done. So I can see this process, it's in process. I can go ahead and launch into there and see where it's at. So we've got X number of pending requests. We've got some that are already done. We've got 43 that are escalated. And then we've got some closed revoked. And it's like, oh, well, what's closed revoked? So we can actually look at the process in and of itself and see, all right, Michael, our assignee, Michael Smith, he's got certain access. The user is Esther. So, the person who's looking at this is going to be able to know, all right, whose user am I looking at? What does this user have access to? What are they able to complete and look at? So we've got multiple different functions and features that this person can use. I can delegate, I can approve, I can revoke it over here to the side. But one of the interesting parts too is I can also see the history. So if I'm coming in and from an audit trail, we can see, all right, this was all assigned automatically inside of the user access review to the right person. So that's really the audit trail. But what happened with previous reviews? So we can see that there were quarterly reviews that were done. This particular person had the access was approved already by, maybe the manager at that particular time. You can see that there's different people that have approved that. Also, maybe the fact that we need attachments. So typically, a lot of times there might be some sort of documentation that's required of user needs this access role for this particular reason. So it might be manager comments or a compliance doc, something like that to, stand behind why does this user have the access that they currently have. So the nice part about this is all of it's in one particular place. If you need to go back and look at that history and maybe talk to, another manager, let's say you're new to the manager role and this is the first time you're doing a user access review, you can, talk to the person who approved it the last time and double check or see if you have any challenges or issues, anything like that. So it allows you to have all of that information in one place and make that all very all very closed circuit. So you're not dealing with 8 or 9 different areas that you're trying to understand what's happening. So those user access reviews, as I said, that's a campaign. so we can do that for the users, we can do that for the roles. So, those user or the role reviews that you have to do, and get those cleaned up. And, the role review process in and of itself, once you get your roles really, really clean, that's where it helps with the automation process. To me, it's kind of, they go hand in hand together. So if you get your roles very, very clean, then you're going to be able to go through and really automate the processes of deprovisioning and that joiner leave remover process as well. Going a little bit further into what does all this mean, and what do I gain with this? So I'm going to kind of talk about the SOD audit, sample testing, and the violation all as a group. So what this allows us to see very, very quickly is we can look at our risks, we can look at violations, we can drill into those. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to see violations of our SODs or whatever policies that are built into this. So we can actually see very quickly that Anna, for example, has been going in, she's been performing different violations. And when we look and drill into this, we put it into layman's terms to make it very understandable as to what's happened. She's triggered a critical violation of the risk create or maintain suppliers, resulting in a financial impact. So the risk score is high. The user contributes to 80% of the overall unresolved financial impact. So you have one user here that's doing a lot within the organization that probably need to focus on. What are they doing? What transactions? So, they're creating or maintaining suppliers, they're processing, they're creating invoices. So all of these different things are really what this user is doing. But the nice part is the sample testing and pulling out that risk or that violation, we're going to call out to, immediately. So, that's the nice part about having the system like this, is we can judge in very, very quickly. We can look at it from a risk perspective, we can look at it from violations. When we look at it from risks, what we do is we really create this chart that allows you to understand where should you spend your time, and what are the risks that are extremely critical that you need to be worried about. If I look over here, for example, I've got low violation frequency and also low impact. So it's not really an area that I'm going to focus on immediately. I'm probably going to focus on this high violation, high impact. Why? Because that's going to be where the financial risk really comes into play of understanding what, that's where an SOD, some sort of violation like that is actually happening, that's costing the organization money or might have a, financial impact involved with it. So the risks allow me to focus on very, very quickly. You can separate these by SOD, business process, general controls, security risks. You can kind of look at them, multiple different ways. So it allows you to understand, so, dormant accounts activated, after 90 days, all of those types of things. So it breaks down to what those risks are, how it's affecting your organization, and what you really need to focus on first. So obviously most of the time it's going to be that upper right quadrant that is the area that you want to focus on the most. So it really gives you a dashboard to be able to improve the visibility and the response on all of these things, because it allows you to see and have access to all of those things up front. So, across my application sets, I've got SAP, I can see Reba, EBS, PeopleSoft. What do my risks, look like across those application sets as a whole, or business processes and those types of things. So I can dial into exactly the problems that I'm having inside of my application sets very, very quickly. So the nice part is it's a dashboard that helps drive all of your access governance, to where you can manage and control and really build the workflows and piece all of those things together to make it very a deliverable, repeatable process for your organization as a whole. So I'm going to flip back over to the demo here, or the slides here real quick. So when we talk about a cost-effective solution, it really is about efficient provisioning. If you can normalize your provisioning process in a way that makes it consistent, repeatable, and also doesn't increase your risk. because it's dialed in and gone through that process of cleaning up the roles, the users, all of those types of things through time. So obviously, it's something that each organization will have to go through those particular processes, but that user lifecycle management is something that we can help totally automate through and make it very easy to where those user access reviews are just done. It just happens at the beginning of the quarter, or every other quarter, whatever your process flow is there. So it also allows you to really access and manage your security and access management. Because of the controls that are put into play, you have an area that you can have a one-stop shop, and you can compare how that user's access was affected. Was it done from an automated process? Was it done from end user? Was it done from the security administrator? Who modified these roles? Who did this? Who granted access? There's a whole workflow process to it, and an auditable trail that's happening. So it allows you to, have those repeatable processes that are completely audited and stored in one particular place. So it helps you move away from those complex mitigations to a security model that's very stable and repeatable, which is going to reduce your cost, but it's also going to make you more effective because it's simplified and it really is tied into one particular place. It's going to make your reporting far easier. So it's going to simplify those access reviews and other controls inside of what you need to do, because being outside of the PeopleSoft system, it allows you to do those cross application reviews very easily and understand, the user has access in 5 different systems. Here's what this user is able to do. We now have a complete picture, an understanding of what access they really have, rather than being very siloed. A lot of the times inside of the ERP world, even if you've got multiple ERP systems within your organization, let's say if you've got SAP and PeopleSoft, or EBS and PeopleSoft, or JD Edwards and PeopleSoft, it's often very siloed, to where the access that a user may have inside of both of the systems, the people who are deciding that don't necessarily understand and know what that user has in that other targeted system. So that's where it can really help you control the SOD and prevent fraud inside of all of that. Um, so that's a little bit about strengthening your PeopleSoft access governance with automation. It helps you identify and rectify those SOD conflicts in minutes. You can also unlock those process efficiencies in provisioning and lifecycle management. So, and that really helps you eliminate or automate the risk analysis, because of that automation process is just going to make your organization more efficient and effective in how you go about providing access to these target applications. And it's going to be very repeatable, which is going to help with automating that risk analysis through all of those. So you can perform your access reviews in hours and not weeks, because it's all automated. It's taken care of for you. It's going to route to the correct workflows and who needs to approve each piece of information, whether it's a role that's being reviewed or a user that's being reviewed, for example. So, and then you can also streamline your emergency access and reporting on that perspective as well. So with that, I'm actually gonna bring Stephanie back in and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Greg. If you have any questions, please add them now into the chat box. Okay, our first question is, what is the implementation timeline?
So from an implementation timeline, you're talking about this takes the data out of your PeopleSoft system and goes into our cloud platform. So the nice part about that is, you're not having to run or install, a bunch of software locally. There, obviously there's some data that's going to have to move between there, but the information is then going to be pulled in. We deliver SOD rule sets as a baseline to go ahead and work with having a baseline of understanding of the risks. Obviously, your organization is going to need to review the SODs and obviously insert some of your own, because of your own policies and procedures that need to come into effect. So when you're talking about, making modifications to that, that's going to take a little bit more time, but you can actually get through the standard process a lot of feedback very quickly within the application, because we're going to go ahead and compare, what's happening inside of your PeopleSoft system, for example, to the standard rule set. So from an implementation, it's going to look like, obviously there's going to be a process. We'll go through a statement of work and all of those types of steps that lay everything out and go through that. So you're not talking about, 6 months to get actionable intelligence inside of the system. You can get real information in a very short period of time because of the information and, us having a delivered SOD rule set already in place.
Okay, great. Our next question is, I think I saw a raised hand. Okay, our next question is, what technical implementation effort is required?
So from a technical perspective, it goes back to there is a connection that we're going to need to pull the information out of the PeopleSoft system, for example. So there, and then that's going to be scheduled. Some organizations do it daily. Kind of depends upon how often your roles and permissions may change. So some may do it a couple of times a day to pull that information out. As I said earlier, this is an external system to, it's not located in your PeopleSoft system like our application security platform is. So there's going to be a connection in there that actually pulls the data out, and then the rest of it's done within the PathLock system. So from a technical perspective, it's really talking about that connection that's going to pull the data in and out, that connector that we have there. So that's what's pulling the data in and out of the PeopleSoft system.
Okay, great. I think that's all the questions we have for today. So thank you so much, Greg, for presenting. We have a few announcements to go over. Greg, will you go to the next slide? Perfect. So we have an upcoming event coming up, the ISACA GRC conference in Orlando, Florida. We'll be at that from August 22nd to the 24th. We also have some upcoming webinars happening. Our next PeopleSoft webinar is PeopleSoft or People SASS, or how to run PeopleSoft with modern SaaS application. And that's a partner webinar with Workstream Technology that will be on August 3rd at 1 p.m. And then our next webinar after that is, we are at PathLock. Just a reminder, we're a cross application platform. So we also have stuff for SAP and Oracle. And our next webinar for that is simplifying security assessments for Oracle EBS. And that's on Thursday, August 11th at 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And if you would like to attend any of these webinars, please go look at our social media pages on LinkedIn, or you can go look at it on our website, and you can register for those webinars. And with that, I'd just like to say thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you at future events.